It began with a dare. Like most foolish ventures into the unknown, it was rooted in arrogance, curiosity, and just a whisper of desperation. The Hollow Zoo had stood at the edge of town for decades, its rusted gates locked with heavy chains and a city ordinance forbidding entry. The official reason for its closure varied, depending on who told the story. Some said it was a financial failure. Others spoke of safety violations and neglected animals. The oldest rumors, however, hinted at something darker, something unspoken that led to its abrupt and unexplained shutdown. Nobody questioned why the city never repurposed the land, why it sat there untouched, a relic of something no one wanted to remember. Most towns have abandoned places, but this one felt different. Nature should have reclaimed it, yet the vines that wrapped around its iron bars never spread beyond them. The air around it was thick, stagnant, as if the land itself refused to breathe. For Daniel, Maya, and Rick, the zoo had always been a background fixture of their childhood, something glimpsed through cracks in the fence during late-night drives or mentioned in hushed tones at parties. But now, standing before the gate, bolt cutters in hand, they were no longer just observers of its legend. They were stepping into it. The chain fell with a dull clatter, the sound swallowed by the silence pressing in from all sides. The gate groaned as it swung open, the hinges screeching in protest as if the zoo itself did not want to be disturbed. Beyond the entrance, a long path stretched forward, flanked by empty ticket booths. A faded banner, once announcing a grand opening decades ago, now hung in tatters, the name of a zoo barely legible beneath the grime. Daniel was the first to step inside. The ground beneath him felt unnaturally soft, as though the earth had been disturbed too many times. The others followed, each footstep careful, calculated. The path was lined with cages, but they were all empty, or at least they seemed to be. Rusted bars stood like ribs of some long-dead creature, stretching into the darkness. Then came the first whisper. Maya stopped mid-step, her head tilting slightly. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. Rick, always the skeptic, scoffed. "Hear what? The wind? The place is falling apart, Maya. It's probably just..." Another whisper. This time, it was clearer. A sound just beyond comprehension, like a voice underwater, trying to form words but failing. It came from the direction of the reptile house, its shattered glass entrance gaping like a mouth frozen in a silent scream. Daniel exchanged a glance with Maya before taking a step toward the sound. The air inside the reptile house was thick, humid, and smelled of something decayed but not entirely rotten. Tanks lined the walls, their glass cracked, their insides coated with dust. Some still had remnants of their previous inhabitants, dry, curled-up husks of creatures long dead. But one tank was different. Unlike the others, its glass was perfectly clean, untouched by time or dust. A single nameplate sat beneath it, Black Mamba. The tank was empty, or at least it should have been. A reflection moved, not theirs. The whisper returned, closer this time, the words almost distinguishable. Not empty, never empty. The three of them stood frozen, eyes locked on the glass tank. The reflection that had moved. Had it been a trick of the light, or had something truly shifted within the empty space? Maya was the first to react, stepping back as a shiver crawled up her spine. "We should go," she whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. It was as if the zoo itself had drawn them in, and leaving now would be more difficult than they had expected. Daniel, however, wasn't ready to turn back. His fingers hovered inches from the pristine glass, watching his own reflection distort slightly, as though the surface rippled like water. "If there's nothing here," he murmured, "then why does this tank look brand new?" Rick huffed. "You're both letting your imaginations get to you. A clean tank doesn't mean ghosts." He reached out and tapped on the glass. The sound was sharp, echoing through the silent reptile house like the click of a lock being undone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, deep within the zoo, something groaned, metal grinding against metal, distant but unmistakable. The three turned toward the sound, their unease growing. It had come from outside, beyond the reptile house. They hesitated only for a moment before retracing their steps to the open air. The night had thickened, and though the sky remained cloudless, the moonlight felt weaker, smothered by an unseen force. Then they saw it. A gate deep within the zoo, one that had been locked with chains just moments ago, now stood ajar. It led into an area not visible from the entrance, a section of the zoo they hadn't planned to explore. The sign above it was rusted, the words barely legible, "Night Habitats." Maya swallowed hard. That gate was closed when we got here. Daniel nodded. He knew because he had noticed it earlier, had even pointed it out when they first walked in. Maybe it was just the wind, he muttered, though he knew how hollow the excuse sounded. The chain that had bound the gate was still there, lying on the ground, but something was wrong with it. The links weren't just broken. They looked melted, twisted into unnatural shapes, as if exposed to impossible heat. Rick exhaled sharply, trying to shake the growing unease. All right, that's weird. But we came to explore, didn't we? We're already here. Might as well see what's inside. His attempt at bravado felt forced, but neither Daniel nor Maya had the energy to argue. As they stepped through the gate, the air shifted. It wasn't just colder, it was heavier, pressing against their skin like an unseen weight. The path ahead was lined with enclosures, each more decrepit than the last. Some were empty, nothing but abandoned dens and collapsed fencing. But others had shadows within them, and some of those shadows moved. The whisper returned, louder this time, threading through the trees and broken exhibits. It didn't come from a single direction anymore. It surrounded them, closing in, carrying a message that no human throat had spoken in decades. You opened the wrong door. The moment they stepped past the broken gate, the zoo changed. It was subtle at first, the kind of shift you only notice when it's too late. The air smelled different, thick with something that clung to the back of their throats. The silence, once eerie but manageable, now felt deliberate, as if the entire place was holding its breath. Daniel was the first to notice the footprints. They stretched across the cracked pavement in front of them, weaving between the overgrown enclosures. The problem was they weren't old. The dust that coated everything in the zoo should have made any prints impossible to miss. Yet these tracks were fresh, pressed deep into the dirt, as if something had walked here just moments ago. Maya knelt down, running her fingers along the impressions. "These are strange," she murmured. "They look human, but..." She stopped herself before finishing the thought. The tracks were elongated, the toes just slightly too sharp, too deliberate. Rick scoffed, though the nervousness in his voice betrayed him. Probably just some drifter using this place as a hideout. Maybe even some weird animal tracks mixed in. His explanation held no real weight, but he needed something to hold on to. The alternative was worse. Daniel followed the footprints with his eyes. They led toward one of the larger enclosures, its rusted sign barely hanging onto the bent metal frame. The words were still legible beneath the corrosion. Nocturnal Predators Exhibit. The chain-link fencing was torn open, the hole jagged and wide enough for something large to slip through. Maya exhaled slowly. "I don't like this." "None of us do," Daniel muttered, stepping closer to the exhibit. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the inside. It was a ruin of its former self, toppled branches, a dried-up artificial pond, and bones. Too many bones. Rick nudged one with his shoe. Animal bones. Must have been leftovers from when this place still ran. But Daniel wasn't convinced. Some of the bones were small, humanoid in shape. Others looked gnawed, hollowed out. Something had lived here long after the zoo had closed. And if the footprints were any indication, it might still be here. Then, somewhere in the distance, a rusted speaker crackled to life. The sound was distorted, warping and shrill, but there were words buried within it. An announcement long past its expiration date. "Attention, visitors, please remain behind the safety barriers. Do not attempt to feed the exhibits. And remember," the audio cut out. A long, dragging pause filled the air. Then, the voice returned, clearer this time. "You're not supposed to be here." The speakers went dead, and somewhere in the darkness of the exhibit, something moved. The air inside the Nocturnal Predator exhibit was suffocating, thick with the scent of decayed wood, and something older, something feral. Daniel's flashlight flickered as he stepped closer to the torn fence, its beam barely strong enough to penetrate the gloom beyond. The crunch of bones beneath his shoe made his stomach twist. Whatever had been in here, it had fed well. Maya was the first to speak, her voice low and urgent. That announcement, it wasn't a recording. She was right. There had been something wrong about it, something too aware. Recordings didn't hesitate. Recordings didn't pause before finishing their sentences. Rick tried to laugh, but it came out uneven, hollow. You guys are seriously overthinking this. Maybe the zoo still has power. Some old system turning on by itself. He gestured toward the scattered bones. And these? Probably from whatever animals were left behind when this place shut down. Daniel wasn't listening. His focus was on the footprints. The fresh ones. They led inside the exhibit and never came back out. He stepped forward despite the protest in his gut, sweeping his flashlight from left to right. The trees within the enclosure had grown wild, their branches twisting unnaturally, forming dark corridors where the light barely reached. Then something shifted. It was distant, but unmistakable, the scrape of movement against stone. Daniel froze. His flashlight caught the edge of a sign half buried in the dirt, its words still faintly visible. Caution, unstable enclosure. Predators may display unpredictable behavior. Maya grabbed his wrist. We need to go. Rick took a step forward instead. We came here to explore, didn't we? What? We're just going to turn back because of some old sign. He swung his own flashlight toward the thick undergrowth, his confidence faltering as the beam caught something that didn't belong. Eyes. They were low to the ground, reflecting the light unnaturally, too large and too steady for any normal animal. And they weren't alone. More pairs of eyes blinked open, scattered throughout the darkness. Some near the trees, some crouched low in the grass. Others, too many, watching from just beyond the broken fence, as if they had been following the group this entire time. Daniel barely had time to register the breathy sound of something exhaling before Maya yanked him backward. The weight of unseen figures shifted in response. The enclosure was not abandoned, and they were not alone. Rick took a step back, his cocky demeanor gone. Okay, now we can go. But as they turned, the rusted speaker crackled to life once more. Visitors' feeding hours have begun, and behind them, something large began to move. The moment the speaker cut out, the silence became unbearable. It wasn't an empty silence. It was thick, alive, a waiting breath before something inevitable. The sound of movement within the enclosure intensified. Not a single creature, but many, shifting in unison as if responding to an unseen signal. The eyes in the dark did not blink. They watched. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. His flashlight trembled slightly as he swept it over the enclosure again. But whatever was moving within the tangled undergrowth was no longer waiting. The first step was cautious, a slow scrape against the dirt. The second was faster. By the third, it was clear that whatever lurked beyond the fence was closing in. Maya was the first to break. Run. They didn't need to be told twice. Rick took off first, his boots slipping against the loose gravel as he sprinted back toward the entrance. Maya followed, her breath ragged. Daniel's feet barely felt the ground beneath him as he propelled himself forward, past the bones, past the caution signs, past the thing that had been watching. But as they reached the open space beyond the enclosure, something changed. The zoo itself responded. Overhead, unseen speakers groaned back to life, sputtering with static before a distorted voice filled the air. Feeding hour has begun. Please remain in designated areas. The lights flickered, not the dim, fading glow of abandoned street lamps, but something unnatural, harsh, buzzing fluorescence blinking on in places they had not worked for decades. The zoo, dead for so many years, was waking up. Daniel skidded to a halt, gasping. This place isn't empty. Maya turned, her face pale in the artificial glow. We need to get out. Now. But Rick was no longer beside them. A sickening realization settled in. The last they had seen him, he had been ahead, running. But now there was no sound of his footsteps, no sign of his panicked breathing. Daniel turned in a slow, terrified circle. "Rick?" The only answer was the static-laced voice from the speakers, looping again and again. "Feeding hour has begun." And then, from somewhere beyond the enclosures, Rick screamed. Rick's scream tore through the unnatural stillness of the zoo, raw and filled with something more than fear, something closer to realization. It was the kind of scream a person made when they understood, in a single, agonizing moment, that they would not be leaving a place alive. Daniel and Maya spun toward the sound, but was already fading, swallowed by the dense trees and decayed structures ahead. Rick had been running in front of them, hadn't he? How had he ended up behind them? Or worse, somewhere else entirely? Daniel bolted forward, ignoring Maya's frantic attempt to grab his arm. He couldn't just stand there, not while Rick was what? Being dragged away? Being hunted? The thought made his stomach lurch, but his legs didn't stop. The cracked pavement beneath his feet blurred as he ran toward the sound, deeper into the zoo, toward whatever nightmare had taken hold of his friend. The old signage barely made sense in the chaos. Faded arrows pointed toward long-forgotten exhibits, their cheerful animal illustrations now warped by time and decay. Primates led one way, big cats another. Aquatic pavilion hung loosely from rusted chains, swinging despite the lack of wind. Maya was beside him now, her breath ragged but determined. "We don't even know where he is." Daniel didn't answer. He was too busy scanning the ground. The footprints, the same ones they had seen before, impossibly fresh. They were here too, but now they weren't just footprints. They were drag marks. Then abruptly, they stopped. The realization hit Daniel like ice water to the spine. The dirt and dust beneath his feet had been disturbed, showing the clear signs of someone being pulled. But just a few feet ahead, the marks vanished completely, as if whoever had made them had simply been lifted away. Maya swallowed hard, her eyes darting up toward the skeletal remains of an old aviary structure overhead. "No way," she whispered. Daniel forced himself to look up. The netting that once covered the top of the aviary was torn in places, frayed ropes and rusted chains hanging down like the remnants of some massive web. It was too dark to see clearly, but the instinctual part of his brain was screaming at him to run. Then a noise, low, guttural, unnatural. A clicking sound, echoing from above. Maya grabbed his wrist so hard it hurt. "Daniel, move." Something large shifted in the shadows above them, its form obscured but undeniably there. The netting swayed, as if something massive had just released its grip. And then, without warning, it dropped. It hit the ground with a sickening thud, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. Daniel and Maya staggered back, their breath caught somewhere between a scream and a silent prayer. The thing that had dropped from the shadows of the ruined aviary did not move at first, its shape obscured by darkness and swirling dust. Then it twitched. A sharp, unnatural cracking sound filled the air as it began to unfurl itself, joints bending in ways that no living thing should be able to. It was large, too large, its silhouette stretching upward, limbs jerking unnaturally as though it was assembling itself from the inside out. Daniel's legs locked in place. His brain screamed at him to run, but his body refused to obey. Maya was the first to break the paralysis, yanking at his sleeve. "Daniel, move." The thing lunged. They barely made it out of the way in time. Daniel threw himself sideways as the creature's massive form crashed forward, colliding with the crumbling remains of a zoo information kiosk. The impact shattered what was left of the glass, sending brittle shards skittering across the pavement. In the flickering artificial glow of the resurrected zoo lights, Daniel caught his first clear glimpse of it. It was wrong. The thing had the vague shape of an animal, but only in the way that a grotesque marionette resembles a human. It had too many joints, too many elongated limbs that bent backward. Its skin was stretched too tight in some places and too loose in others, as if it had been crudely stitched together from different creatures. Its head, if it could even be called that, was smooth and featureless, save for two enormous, glossy black eyes that reflected nothing. It let out a sound, a clicking, chittering noise that felt more like language than instinct. It was communicating. Daniel's stomach turned. That's not an animal. Maya's grip on his wrist tightened. Then what the hell is it? They didn't have time to find out. The thing reoriented itself with an unsettling fluidity, its limbs snapping back into place like a puppet under the control of unseen strings. The clicking noise grew louder, and then, from the ruined aviary above, another pair of glossy black eyes blinked open. And then another, and another. Daniel didn't wait to see how many there were. He grabbed Maya's hand and ran. Daniel and Maya ran blindly, their lungs burning with every step as they tore through the overgrown pathways of the abandoned zoo. The twisted creature behind them moved in a way that defied nature, its limbs jerking and snapping into new positions mid-motion, as if it was adapting to the chase. But worse than that was the sound above them. The clicking. It wasn't just coming from the creature on the ground. It was everywhere, hidden in the crumbling ruins of the aviary, inside the collapsed enclosures, in the skeletal remains of long-forgotten structures. The zoo was no longer just a graveyard of abandoned exhibits. It was a nest. They turned a sharp corner, nearly toppling over a rusted turnstile, and found themselves in what used to be the reptile house. The entrance loomed ahead, its glass doors shattered long ago. Inside, faint emergency lights flickered, powered by whatever unnatural force had reanimated the zoo. Maya didn't hesitate. She grabbed Daniel's sleeve and dragged him inside, their boots crunching over broken glass. The air was thick, stale, carrying the scent of dust, and something else, something rotten. Daniel doubled over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. What the hell was that thing? Maya shook her head, her face pale in the dim light. I don't know, but I don't think it's alone. The clicking had stopped, but that didn't bring comfort. Silence in this place felt more dangerous than noise. Daniel lifted his flashlight, scanning their surroundings. The reptile house was in ruins. Empty terrariums lined the walls, their glass cracked or missing entirely. The information plaques remained untouched by time: king cobra, Nile crocodile, Komodo dragon. The ghosts of what once lived here. Something about the stillness made his skin crawl. It was too intentional, as if the entire structure was waiting for something. Maya moved toward the back, where a door marked employees only stood slightly ajar. We need to find another way out, she whispered. If those things are everywhere. A noise. Not clicking this time. Breathing. It was deep and ragged, coming from beyond the door. Not an animal's breath. Human. Maya's eyes locked onto Daniel's, wide with fear. Someone, or something, was inside with them. And then, from the darkness beyond the door, a voice rasped out a single, chilling word. Help! The word hung in the air like a phantom, barely above a whisper, yet carrying enough weight to freeze Daniel and Maya in place. Help! Daniel's first instinct was to run. Every fiber of his being screamed that no human voice should exist here, in this forgotten tomb of a zoo. But Maya took a cautious step forward, her flashlight trembling in her grip. Who's there? She called, her voice barely steady. Silence. Daniel exhaled shakily. Maya, we need to go. But then, another breath. A wheezing inhale, followed by a voice that was raw, desperate. Please don't go. The door marked employees only stood ajar, the darkness beyond it thick and impenetrable. The sound was coming from the other side, from the unknown depths of the reptile house. Daniel had no desire to see what lay within, but Maya was already moving forward. Maya, stop, he hissed, grabbing her arm. That thing, whatever it is, it could be one of them. Maya hesitated, eyes darting toward the door, then back to Daniel. And if it's not, she countered. If it's someone trapped here? Daniel had no answer. She pushed forward, slipping through the door before he could stop her. Cursing under his breath, Daniel followed. The air was even thicker back here, carrying a damp, rotting smell. The flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing a hallway lined with rusted metal doors. Animal holding rooms, where zoo staff once kept dangerous creatures before transferring them to exhibits. Some doors were ajar, their contents long emptied. Others were bolted shut, their locks crusted with age and rust. And at the very end of the corridor, slumped against the wall, was a man. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken deep into his skull. His clothes, what little remained of them, were shredded, his skin marred by deep, jagged scars. He looked like he had been here for years. But that was impossible. The zoo had been closed for decades. Maya knelt beside him. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You're alive." The man's lips trembled, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Not for long. Daniel felt a cold dread creep into his bones. "What do you mean?" The man's breath hitched. His gaze flickered past them, deeper into the hallway. "They keep me here. Watch me. Study me." His hand clenched weakly. "They made me stay." A sound echoed from the dark. The familiar, sickening clicking. The man's eyes widened with terror. "They're here." Maya grabbed Daniel's wrist, her voice sharp with urgency. "We need to move. Now." From the blackened depths of the reptile house, something began to stir. And this time, there was more than one. The corridor echoed with the ominous clicks and clacks, a symphony of dread that filled the air with a chilling resonance. Daniel's heart raced as he met Maya's terrified gaze. There was no time for hesitation. They had to get out of the reptile house, fast. Maya pulled at Daniel's arm, urging him to help the man up. "We can't leave him here," she insisted, her voice a mix of fear and determination. But the man's frail body sagged against the wall, his eyes wide with panic. "You don't understand," he gasped. "If you help me, you're sealing your fate. They'll come for all of us." "Then we fight," Daniel replied, his voice firm. "I'm not leaving anyone behind." Maya looked torn, glancing between the man and the darkened hallway that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. "We need to hurry. Whatever is out there, it's not waiting for us." With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Daniel knelt down, slipping an arm around the man's shoulder. "We can do this together. Just hold on." They heaved him up, the man's weight a dead weight against them. As they began to move, the clicking intensified, a chaotic rhythm that echoed from the depths of the corridor. Shadows danced around them, elongating and twisting as if the darkness itself was alive, reaching out to snatch them back. They stumbled into the open space of the reptile house, desperation propelling them forward. The flickering lights above cast grotesque shadows on the walls, creating the illusion of lurking figures just beyond their sight. Daniel felt the urge to look back, but he resisted. They needed to keep moving. "Which way?" Maya asked, her breath quickening. The tension in the air thickened as the clicking grew louder, accompanied by guttural growls that hinted at something more primal. "Back the way we came, through the entrance," Daniel shouted. "We can't stay here." They made their way back to the corridor, the man struggling to keep pace. Each step felt like an eternity, the threat looming ever closer. Then, without warning, a series of heavy thuds echoed from behind them. Daniel risked a glance over his shoulder, and his blood turned to ice. It was more than one. At least 4 of the twisted creatures lurked in the shadows, their malformed limbs twisting in a grotesque dance. They moved with an unnatural grace, gliding across the ground as they closed the distance between them. The thing that had once fallen from the aviary had brought its companions. "Run!" Daniel shouted, propelling them forward. Maya gripped the man tighter as they burst into the main exhibit hall, the light flickering above them in frantic bursts. The exhibit hall was massive, filled with broken glass and debris, remnants of a once thriving zoo now reduced to chaos. Enclosures stood empty, the iron bars rusting away, creating a sense of desolation. But in the distance, a glimmer of hope caught Daniel's eye, the emergency exit sign glowing faintly at the far end of the hall. "Over there!" he yelled, gesturing toward the sign. "We just need to make it to that door." They sprinted forward, but the creatures were relentless, their clicking sounds echoing in a maddening cacophony. Just as they neared the door, Daniel felt a hand on his shoulder, a cold grip that sent shivers down his spine. He turned, only to see one of the twisted beings lunging at him, its gaping maw filled with jagged teeth glistening in the dim light. "Go!" he shouted, shoving Maya and the man ahead of him as he braced himself for the impact. In that moment, everything hinged on their escape. The darkness was closing in, and with it, the promise of an unfathomable terror. The door loomed ahead like a beacon of salvation, the emergency exit sign pulsating in the dim light, urging them forward. Maya, her heart pounding in her chest, pushed the man ahead of her, while Daniel turned to face the approaching horror. The creature lunged at him, its grotesque form a blur in the flickering light. Daniel felt time slow as he instinctively ducked, narrowly avoiding the creature's snapping jaws. He could smell the rancid stench of decay wafting from it, an olfactory reminder of the life it had once known. It collided with the wall behind him, the force sending a shudder through the ground. He could hear Maya screaming as she and the man reached the exit, their bodies trembling with the terror of the moment. "Hurry!" Daniel shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He could see the panic in Maya's eyes as she fumbled with the door handle, desperate to push it open. But the sound of the other creatures, more sinister than ever, echoed in the hallway behind them, a warning that time was running out. The door creaked ominously as it swung open, revealing a narrow stairwell leading up into the unknown. With a final glance over his shoulder, Daniel saw the first creature turn toward the sound of the open door, its focus shifting in their direction. They knew. "Go," he urged, shoving Maya and the man through the doorway before darting after them. The creature let out a guttural growl, echoing through the enclosure as it lunged forward, snapping at Daniel's heels. He dashed up the stairs, the sound of the beast crashing into the door behind him sending adrenaline coursing through his veins. They ascended quickly, the narrow stairwell twisting and turning, dimly lit by emergency lights that cast eerie shadows on the concrete walls. Daniel could feel his heart racing, each thud echoing louder than the last as the primal instinct to survive took over. "Where does this lead?" Maya gasped, glancing back at Daniel with fear etched across her face. "I don't know, but it has to be better than facing that thing," Daniel replied, pushing them onward. At the top of the stairs, they emerged into a small, darkened room that appeared to be an old staff area. Desks were overturned, papers scattered, and the smell of mildew hung heavily in the air. A single window was cracked, allowing a thin beam of moonlight to filter in, illuminating dust motes that danced like ghosts. Daniel moved to the window, peering out into the night. Below, the zoo loomed like a dark giant, the structures broken and crumbling. He could see the perimeter fence, long neglected, but it appeared there was a gap they could slip through. Hope surged within him as he turned to Maya and the man. "We can make it out of here. We just have to get to that fence." But before they could formulate a plan, a noise interrupted them, a low, rhythmic thumping, echoing from the stairwell below. The creatures were already on their way up, relentless in their pursuit. Daniel's stomach dropped as he realized time was no longer a luxury they possessed. Maya's eyes widened. "We have to move. Now!" Without another word, they rushed toward the window. Daniel forced it open, the metal creaking in protest, and they climbed out into the cool night air. The drop was short, but the ground felt unsteady beneath his feet as they hit the ground. He turned to see Maya helping the man down, her face lit with determination. "We need to run," Daniel shouted, glancing back at the building, shadows moving against the flickering light of the emergency exit. The creatures would be out in seconds, and they couldn't afford to be caught now. They dashed across the open ground, adrenaline propelling them forward. The fence loomed closer, a promise of freedom just out of reach. The sound of clicking grew louder, more frantic as the creatures emerged from the building, their grotesque forms illuminated by the emergency lights. "Almost there," Maya urged, her voice filled with urgency as they reached the fence. But as they approached, Daniel felt a sudden sense of dread wash over him. What if the creatures could climb? What if this was just the beginning? With one last surge of energy, they reached the fence and began to squeeze through the gap. Daniel felt the sharp edges digging into his skin, but he pushed through, his mind set on the escape ahead. Once on the other side, they would be free. Just as Daniel emerged into the night, he He heard a terrible, blood-curdling scream. Maya's scream. The sound pierced the night air, a visceral cry that cut through him like a knife. He turned, horror flooding his senses as he saw the man caught in the grip of one of the creatures, its claws digging into his flesh. "No!" Daniel screamed, reaching for Maya, but he was too late. The darkness surged forward, and the zoo, once a place of wonder, had transformed into a nightmare from which there was no escape. The world around Daniel crumbled as he witnessed Maya's horror. The creature's claws sank into the man's flesh, ripping through clothing and skin with grotesque ease. Time slowed, and all Daniel could hear was the panicked gasping of the man as he fought against the monster's grip, desperation etched across his face. It felt like an eternity, yet all unfolded in mere seconds. "Maya!" Daniel screamed, his heart pounding in his chest. The words escaped his lips in a raw, primal cry, a plea for help that echoed into the void. He couldn't lose her, not after everything they had faced together. He lunged forward, adrenaline coursing through him like fire, but the instinct to save them both quickly battled against the fear coursing through him. "Maya!" he called again, this time with more urgency. He tore his gaze from the horrifying scene, forcing himself to think clearly. He needed a plan, an escape route, anything that could help them through this nightmare. But as he glanced around, it became clear that the darkness was closing in fast. Shadows stretched out behind him, and he could feel the pull of the zoo's past. The whispers of creatures that had once roamed these grounds now revived by malevolence. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. From the corner of the building, he saw a glint of metal, the remnants of a once ornate animal enclosure, now decayed and twisted. If he could reach it, there might be something he could use as a weapon. Without thinking, he pivoted and darted toward the shadows, the sound of the struggle echoing behind him. The creature's growls mixed with the frantic cries of the man, but Daniel pushed on. He didn't know how he would confront whatever lay ahead, but he had to try. The enclosure loomed closer, the rusty bars barely holding together, and he could see jagged pieces of metal that might serve as improvised weapons. "Stay back!" he shouted as he ripped off a long, sharp piece of rusted metal, gripping it tightly. It felt heavy in his hands, but it was better than nothing against the horror of the creatures. He turned back, the sounds of struggle now muffled, but the sight of Maya and the man stuck with him, fear giving way to anger. He would not let them fall. Just as he was about to head back to help, a chilling realization washed over him. What if this was all part of the zoo's twisted legacy? Rumors had circulated for years about the dark history of the place. Tales of animal sacrifices and unnatural rituals that had supposedly taken place behind the scenes. The creatures before him seemed like the cursed spirits of those horrors, hunting for revenge against those who dared to enter their domain. Shaking off the memories of the whispers that haunted him, Daniel rushed back to where he had last seen Maya. His heart dropped as he approached the open area where the struggle had occurred. The ground was stained with blood, and a chilling silence enveloped him like a thick fog. Had the creatures moved on, or was it just the calm before another storm? He felt a sickening twist in his stomach as he surveyed the scene. The man was gone, and there was no sign of Maya. Panic surged through him as he called out her name, desperation clawing at his throat. "Maya, where are you?" Then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged, staggering toward him. It was Maya, her face pale and streaked with dirt, but she was alive. Relief flooded through him, yet it was short-lived. "Daniel!" she gasped, collapsing into his arms, shaking uncontrollably. "It's too late for him. We need to leave now." "But what happened?" Daniel asked, his heart racing as he scanned the area for any signs of the creature. "Where did it go?" "They took him," Maya cried, her voice trembling. "I tried to help, but there were too many of them. I couldn't." Her words broke off in his sobs, the weight of what had happened settling heavy on her shoulders. Daniel squeezed her tightly, determination igniting within him. They couldn't stay here. They had to get away from the zoo and its haunted past. But the haunting thought remained. If the creatures had taken the man, what would they want next? They hurried away from the enclosure, hearts racing and minds racing faster. The air grew thick with tension as they traversed the darkness, the echoing clicks growing louder, signaling the return of the creatures that now hunted them. Every step felt like a countdown to the inevitable, but Daniel was resolute. They would escape this place, and together they would uncover the truth behind the zoo's dark legacy, whatever it might be. As they approached a larger clearing within the confines of the zoo, the moonlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the cracked pavement. Daniel paused, catching his breath and scanning the surroundings. The buildings loomed ominously, the shadows shifting and moving as if they were alive. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As Daniel and Maya stood in the clearing, a profound sense of unease settled over them. The moonlight, once a symbol of hope, now cast eerie shadows that danced across the cracked pavement, mimicking the twisted shapes of their fears. They had escaped one nightmare only to find themselves trapped in another, a maze of memories that clung to the remnants of the zoo, whispering secrets that begged to be uncovered. "Where do we go now?" Maya whispered, her voice barely above a tremor. Daniel could see the fear etched in her eyes, reflecting the turmoil within. They were no longer just fleeing from the creatures. They were on the brink of confronting the horrors that lay buried beneath the zoo's surface. Daniel took a deep breath, forcing himself to think clearly. "We need to find a way out of here, but we also need to understand what we're dealing with." His mind raced with the rumors he had heard, the tales of the zoo's history and the dark rituals that had once been performed within its confines. What are they unleashed? In the distance, the sounds of rustling grew louder, and Daniel's instinct urged him to move. He led Maya toward a building that appeared to have once been an information center, its structure partially collapsed yet still standing. They needed shelter, even if just for a moment, to gather their thoughts. As they entered the building, the air felt heavy with memories, ghostly echoes of laughter, whispers of families visiting long ago. Dust-covered brochures littered the floor, each one detailing the zoo's attractions, the vibrant creatures that had once called this place home. It was a stark contrast to the horror they had just experienced. "Look at this," Maya said, picking up an old brochure that had fluttered to the ground. It depicted a grand opening event, complete with smiling children and a parade of animals. But the headline caught Daniel's attention. "Welcome to the most unique zoo experience." It felt ominous, a dark irony that made his skin crawl. "There's something off about all of this," Daniel said, scanning the walls. The faded photographs showed healthy animals, families enjoying their time at the zoo. But there were no pictures of the darker side. The stories of animals that had gone missing, the whispers of sacrifices to appease some unknown force. He felt the weight of the history pressing down on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were intruding on something sacred and sinister. Maya, sensing his growing apprehension, stepped closer. "Daniel, what if the creatures are manifestations of this place's dark past? What if they're tied to the zoo itself?" Her voice trembled with the realization. What if they're the spirits of the animals that suffered here? The thought sent chills down Daniel's spine. Then we need to figure out how to stop this. There has to be a way to put them to rest. He turned to a bulletin board plastered with old news clippings, each one a fragment of the zoo's haunting history. His fingers traced the edges of an article titled "The Mysterious Disappearance of Zookeepers," detailing how several staff members had vanished without a trace during a lunar eclipse, a night when strange noises were reported echoing through the enclosures. "This happened decades ago," Daniel murmured, his mind racing. "What if they didn't just disappear? What if they became part of whatever is haunting this place?" Maya nodded, her eyes wide with understanding. "We have to find the truth behind their disappearances. It might lead us to what we're facing now." She pointed to another clipping that mentioned the zoo's sudden closure. This all ties together. As they pieced together the fragments of the past, Daniel felt a strange energy coursing through him, a mixture of fear and determination. "Let's find out where they worked. We need to go to the heart of the zoo." With renewed resolve, They stepped out of the building, and the darkness felt alive around them. The maze of memories continued to swirl, threatening to consume them. Yet, within that chaos, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. They had come too far to turn back now. They would confront whatever darkness lingered in the heart of the zoo, unearthing the truth that had been buried for too long. The path ahead twisted like the stories they had uncovered, but Daniel and Maya were determined to navigate it together. As they moved deeper into the zoo, they knew the next step would lead them closer to the confrontation that awaited. They could sense that time was running out, the creature's patience wearing thin, but Daniel was resolute. They would not just be survivors. They would be the ones to break the cycle of horror that had gripped this place for far too long. As Daniel and Maya ventured deeper into the heart of the zoo, the atmosphere shifted from eerie to oppressive. The remnants of the past enveloped them, echoing the laughter and joy that had once filled this place, now replaced by an overwhelming silence that weighed heavily on their shoulders. Each step echoed against the pavement, a reminder that they were not alone. Spirits of the past lingered, watching with unseen eyes. They navigated through abandoned pathways overgrown with weeds, the remnants of cages and enclosures looming like specters from a forgotten time. The cracked signs, once vibrant and inviting, now hung limply, their colors faded and peeling. Daniel's heart raced as they passed the remnants of what was once a lion's den, a sinister reminder of the power and majesty that now lay dormant beneath layers of neglect. "I can't believe how different this place feels now," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's as if the animals left behind a part of their souls." She paused, glancing at a rusted gate. What happened here was more than just the closing of a zoo. Something dark took hold. Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of her words. There's a reason for all of this. The disappearances, the strange noises. We need to find where it all started. As they continued down the path, Daniel's thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of rustling, sending a chill down his spine. The creatures were still out there, and they were still hunting. Suddenly, a sharp scream pierced the silence, cutting through the still air like a knife. Daniel and Maya froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The scream echoed again, more desperate this time, as if calling for help. It resonated through the twisted pathways, drawing them closer to the source. "What was that?" Maya gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "Let's find out," Daniel replied, the need to uncover the truth outweighing the fear that clawed at his instincts. They followed the sound, moving cautiously, every rustle in the underbrush heightening their awareness. The echoes led them to a section of the zoo they hadn't yet explored, a long-abandoned reptile house, its entrance draped in shadows and vines. Pushing through the overgrown foliage, they stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. A series of glass enclosures lined the walls, but instead of the exotic reptiles they once housed, they were now filled with dust and darkness. The distant screams faded, replaced by a hushed silence that engulfed them. "What if we're not supposed to be here?" Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "What if this is where everything went wrong?" "Then we need to figure out how to right it," Daniel replied, steeling himself against the encroaching darkness. He stepped further into the building, his eyes scanning the dimly lit interior. As they moved deeper, he noticed markings on the walls, symbols etched into the concrete, their meaning obscured by layers of grime. They felt ancient, an echo of rituals long forgotten. Maya stepped closer, her eyes widening as she traced the symbols with her fingers. "These look like the markings from the old stories," she murmured. "The ones about sacrifices and rituals to appease the spirits of the animals." A chill ran down Daniel's spine as he recognized the significance of her words. This place had been more than a zoo. It had been a site of dark worship, a place where the line between the living and the dead blurred. As they stood before the markings, a heavy feeling settled in the air, and the temperature dropped suddenly. Daniel felt an unnatural chill creep down his spine, and he instinctively turned to Maya. "We need to get out of here," he urged, the urgency in his voice rising. But before they could retreat, a A low growl resonated from the shadows. The sound reverberated through the building, chilling them to the bone. "They're here," Maya breathed, fear evident in her eyes. Daniel's grip tightened around the rusted metal piece he had found earlier, the only semblance of protection they had against the darkness that threatened to engulf them. "Stay close," Daniel instructed, stepping cautiously toward the exit. But just as they turned, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing, its features obscured by the darkness. The creature's eyes glowed, piercing through the gloom like twin orbs of malevolence. "What do you want?" Daniel shouted, his voice echoing off the walls, but the creature merely tilted its head, as if intrigued by their presence. It was as if it could sense their fear, feeding off it like a predator to its prey. The creature took a step closer, its movements fluid yet unnerving, and Daniel could feel the weight of its gaze upon them. They were caught in a web of history and darkness, the echoes of the past coming alive. As the creature growled again, Daniel knew they had to confront whatever this entity represented. It was not just about survival anymore. It was about unearthing the truth of the zoo's legacy and breaking the cycle of horror that had claimed so many before them. In that moment, Daniel felt an unwavering resolve building within him. They would not be mere spectators in this tale of terror. They would become the authors of their own fate. It was time to face the darkness head-on, to reclaim the past and reshape their future, no matter what horrors lay ahead. The oppressive atmosphere of the abandoned reptile house grew heavier as the creature loomed closer, its eyes glinting with an otherworldly intensity. Daniel's heart raced, caught between primal fear and a desperate need to uncover the truth hidden within the shadows of the zoo. He could feel Maya's presence beside him, her breath shallow and quickened, mirroring his own trepidation. They stood on the precipice of confrontation, aware that they were about to face whatever horror had haunted this place for decades. "Stay behind me," Daniel whispered to Maya, his voice steadied by determination. He felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through him, readying him for whatever lay ahead. As he brandished the rusted metal piece he had found earlier, its weight felt reassuring in his hand, a relic of both the past and their fight for survival. The creature, with its dark silhouette shifting in the dim light, seemed to sense their fear, inching closer with deliberate slowness. "What are you?" Daniel demanded, his voice echoing through the decaying building, desperation lacing his tone. The creature paused, tilting its head as if contemplating his question. Its growl reverberated again, a sound so deep it felt like it resonated in Daniel's bones. It didn't speak, but the air around them crackled with an unspoken history, one that was desperate to be uncovered. With every heartbeat, the tension thickened, filling the air with an electrifying anticipation. The shadows around them danced ominously, teasing at the secrets that had been buried for too long. Daniel took a step forward, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity. "We want to know what happened here," he pressed, trying to appeal to whatever consciousness lay within the creature. "We want to understand." As he spoke, something in the air shifted. The creature's eyes seemed to flicker, almost as if they were reflecting the memories of a time long gone. Daniel's mind raced, trying to piece together the connections between the creature and the zoo's dark past. Suddenly, he recalled the stories Maya had shared about the rituals performed at the zoo, the sacrifices meant to appease the spirits of the animals. It was as if the creature was the embodiment of those very spirits, trapped between realms, longing for liberation. Just then, a deafening roar erupted from the depths of the building, shaking the walls around them. The sound was not from the creature in front of them, but rather from deeper within the shadows, a reminder of the dormant beast that had once roamed this zoo. Daniel's heart dropped. They were not alone in this encounter. The creatures of the past were awakening, and the balance between life and death was about to be shattered. "Daniel, we need to go," Maya urged, fear etched across her face. But before they could retreat, the creature lunged forward, its movements swift and fluid, blocking their escape. "No!" Daniel shouted, raising the metal piece in defense, feeling the adrenaline surge within him. Yet, as the creature drew closer, something shifted in its gaze. There was a glimmer of recognition, a flicker of understanding that transcended the boundaries of language. "Please," Daniel implored, lowering the metal piece slightly, realizing that aggression would not resolve this confrontation. "We're not here to harm you. We want to help. We want to understand what happened to you in this place." The creature hesitated, its breath hot against Daniel's skin, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to hold its breath, suspended in time. In that fragile silence, the creature's demeanor shifted, its growl subsiding to an almost mournful sound. Daniel sensed a deep sadness radiating from it, a sorrow that spoke of abandonment and pain. "You were once the guardians of this zoo, weren't you?" he whispered, a sudden realization dawning upon him. "You protected the animals, and now you're left here to suffer." Maya, still trembling beside him, reached out, her voice gentle yet resolute. "We can help you find peace. We can uncover the truth together." The creature's eyes softened, a flicker of hope sparking within them. For a fleeting moment, the darkness that enveloped them seemed to lift, revealing a glimmer of light within the despair. With renewed determination, Daniel took a step closer, extending his hand towards the creature. "Show us," he urged. "Help us find the answers we seek. We can break the cycle together." The creature hesitated, then slowly lowered its head, a sign of reluctant acceptance. As Daniel and Maya stepped forward, the shadows that had haunted the zoo began to recede, revealing the remnants of what once was a vibrant sanctuary filled with life. They felt a connection forming, a bond forged in the shared understanding of loss and longing. Together, they would face the echoes of the past, confronting the darkness that had claimed this place and the spirits that lingered within it. In that moment, they understood that their journey was far from over. It had only just begun. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but they were no longer alone. They were not just witnesses to the horror of the zoo's past. They had become its champions, ready to unearth the truth and restore balance to a world where light and darkness intertwined. The zoo's secrets would no longer be buried, and the echoes of the past would finally find their voice. The air in the reptile house felt charged with anticipation as Daniel, Maya, and the creature prepared to venture deeper into the darkness. With each step, the decaying walls seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, revealing glimpses of a long-lost world that was both haunting and beautiful. The echoes of their footsteps mingled with distant, ghostly sounds, a reminder that they were not alone in this forsaken place. As they pressed forward, the creature led the way, its movements fluid and graceful despite its imposing form. Daniel and Maya exchanged nervous glances, both understanding the weight of the moment. They were about to uncover the truth behind the zoo's haunting past. But the deeper they went, the more they felt the burden of the spirits that had been trapped within its walls. The dim light flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls, revealing remnants of the zoo's former glory. Painted murals of exotic animals, rusted cages long forgotten, and scraps of faded posters advertising grand exhibits. Each relic whispered stories of life and joy, but now they serve as a testament to a bygone era, a world where humans and animals once coexisted in harmony. "Look," Maya pointed, her voice barely above a whisper, as she spotted a series of intricate carvings etched into the walls. "These must be the stories of the zoo's history." Daniel stepped closer, examining the images. They depicted animals in their natural habitats, accompanied by humans caring for them, figures of zookeepers and visitors laughing and playing. But as he traced his fingers along the carvings, he noticed a dark undertone creeping into the artwork, subtle yet sinister. In one particular panel, the imagery shifted dramatically. The once harmonious scenes morphed into chaos, with animals appearing wild and fierce, breaking free from their enclosures. A chill raced down Daniel's spine as he understood the implications. This was a narrative of unrest, a warning that something terrible had happened within these walls, something that led to the zoo's demise. "Do you think the rituals had something to do with this?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. The story spoke of sacrifices meant to appease the spirits. But what if those spirits turned vengeful? Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of her words. They were navigating a labyrinth of grief and rage, and the stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. As they continued deeper, the air grew colder, wrapping around them like a shroud. The creature paused, turning its gaze towards a hidden door at the end of the hall, its eyes flickering with urgency. "What is it?" Daniel asked, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. The creature beckoned them forward, its massive body blocking the entrance, protecting them from the unseen horrors lurking beyond. "Are you sure about this?" Maya hesitated, her instinct screaming to turn back. But Daniel felt an undeniable pull, a sense of destiny that drove him forward. "We have to see what's behind there. This might be the key to understanding everything." With a deep breath, he reached out and pushed against the door, which creaked open to reveal a darkened chamber. Inside, the room was filled with remnants of past lives, broken cages, scattered bones, and tattered remains of stuffed animals that seemed to stare back at them with hollow eyes. A cold wind swept through the chamber, stirring the dust and debris as if the very air was alive with memories. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, but he steeled himself, determined to uncover the truth that lay hidden within the ruins. As they stepped inside, a flicker of movement caught Daniel's eye, a shadow darting across the room. He instinctively reached for the metal piece he had been carrying, gripping it tightly as a sense of dread washed over him. Maya clutched his arm, her wide eyes searching the darkness. "What was that?" she whispered, fear palpable in her voice. Suddenly, the creature let out a low growl, a sound that resonated with both warning and sorrow. The shadows shifted, coalescing into forms that were neither animal nor human. Daniel's breath hitched as he realized they were surrounded by apparitions, spirits of the zoo's past, their faces twisted in anguish, forever trapped between realms. "We need to go," Maya urged, panic rising in her voice, but Daniel felt compelled to stand his ground. "Wait, they're trying to communicate." He took a step closer, his heart racing as he locked eyes with one of the spirits, a woman dressed in zookeeper attire, her expression one of desperate longing. "What do you want from us?" he implored, hoping to bridge the gap between their worlds. The room pulsed with energy, and as Daniel's voice echoed, the spirits shifted, their forms becoming clearer. They whispered incoherently, a chorus of voices rising and falling like the tide, revealing fragments of their tragic stories. "Help us," one spirit pleaded, while another cried out, "Uncover the truth." Daniel felt the weight of their anguish settling upon him, an unbearable burden of sorrow and regret that threatened to crush him. As the spirits continued their haunting pleas, Daniel realized that they were not merely trapped. They were waiting for someone to take action, to break the cycle of despair that had enveloped the zoo. The significance of their journey began to crystallize. The key to releasing these tormented souls lay within the very truths they sought to uncover. In that moment, Daniel understood that the unraveling of the zoo's mysteries was not just a quest for knowledge. It was a mission of redemption. The spirits were not just remnants of the past. They were allies in their fight against the darkness that had consumed the zoo. Together, they would illuminate the shadows, paving the way for healing and closure. The echoes of the past began to fade, leaving behind a sense of purpose that ignited a fire within Daniel and Maya. They were no longer mere visitors in a haunted zoo. They had become the catalyst for change, the voices of the lost, ready to confront the darkness and reclaim the zoo's legacy. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but they were prepared to face whatever awaited them. As Daniel and Maya stood amidst the swirling energy of the spirits, a newfound resolve washed over them. The cries for help were not just echoes of the past. They were urgent calls to action. The two friends felt a profound connection to the souls trapped within the zoo, and a shared understanding that their journey was far from over. They needed to delve deeper into the heart of the mystery, to confront the dark forces that had led to the zoo's demise. With the weight of the spirits pleas heavy upon their shoulders, Daniel took a deep breath and turned to Maya. "We need to find out what really happened here," he said, his voice steady despite the tremors of fear coursing through him. "The rituals, the sacrifices, it's all connected. We have to uncover the truth." Maya nodded, her determination mirroring his own. Together, they resolved to unravel the threads of history that had bound the zoo and its inhabitants to such sorrow. Leaving the haunted chamber behind, they retraced their steps to the main exhibit area, now awash in shadows. The flickering lights created a surreal ambience, distorting the once familiar shapes of cages and enclosures into something more menacing. As they walked, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were alive, whispering secrets that begged to be uncovered. Each rustle of leaves, each distant thud echoed as if the zoo itself was watching them, waiting for them to uncover its hidden truths. Arriving back at the entrance of the reptile house, Daniel stopped, his gaze fixed on an old display case that had once housed a massive serpent. The glass was shattered, and the remnants of the creature's habitat lay in disarray, the soil scattered and plants wilted. A strange energy pulsed from the exhibit, drawing him closer. This was once a place of wonder, he mused, memories of laughter and joy flooding his mind. What happened to turn it into this? Maya placed her hand on Daniel's shoulder, grounding him. "The answer lies within the history of this place," she said. "We need to find records, journals, anything that can shed light on the events that led to the closure." With a shared understanding, they made their way to the administrative offices, a building long forgotten and overtaken by nature. The door creaked open, revealing a darkened interior filled with dust and memories. Inside, the air was stale, yet Daniel felt a thrill of anticipation. It was here, among the remnants of paperwork and artifacts, that they would find the key to unlocking the zoo's secrets. As they rummaged through the debris, they discovered filing cabinets and shelves filled with old photographs, press clippings, and journals. "Look at this," Maya exclaimed, holding up a faded photograph of the zoo's grand opening, smiling faces beaming with excitement. But as they flipped through the pages of the journals, a darker narrative began to emerge. The entries spoke of strange occurrences, animals acting unpredictably, and the gradual decline of the zoo's reputation. Daniel's heart sank as he read about the mysterious disappearance of several zookeepers, and whispers of the supernatural began to surface. They were trying to harness something they didn't understand, he said, piecing together the fragments of the past. One particular entry caught Daniel's attention, dated just weeks before the zoo closed. "We performed the rituals to connect with the spirits of the animals, to seek their guidance," it read. But something went wrong. The animals grew restless, and their spirits became angry. "We fear we have angered the guardians of this place." A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine as he realized the implications of the words. The zoo had not merely fallen into disrepair. It had been cursed by its own ambition. "Do you think this is what the spirits want us to know?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That their anger has trapped them here?" Daniel nodded, the weight of the truth settling heavily upon him. "We need to confront the source of this anger," he replied. "We must appease the guardians to set these souls free." With determination burning in their hearts, they resolved to find a way to perform the rituals properly, to mend the rift between the living and the dead. As they continued their search through the office, they stumbled upon a dusty box tucked away in a corner. Inside were various artifacts, including ceremonial masks, symbols etched with ancient meanings, and a collection of handwritten notes detailing the rituals performed long ago. Among them, a specific ritual caught Daniel's eye, the ritual of reconciliation. This was it. They had found what they needed to heal the divide between the spirits and the living. With the artifacts in hand and their purpose clear, Daniel and Maya knew they had to return to the chamber where they had first encountered the spirits. The journey back felt different this time, the air electric with anticipation. Each step resonated with purpose as they approached the door, the weight of the spirits' anguish pushing them forward. They were not just participants in this haunting tale. They were the ones who would rewrite its ending. Arriving at the chamber, Daniel took a deep breath and placed the artifacts before him. The air crackled with energy as the spirits began to coalesce around them, their forms shimmering in the dim light. "We've come to help you," he declared, his voice steady and resolute. "We want to bring peace to your restless souls. We will perform the ritual of reconciliation." As the spirits responded with whispers of hope, Daniel and Maya set to work, the artifacts guiding them through the ancient incantations. The air thickened with anticipation, and the world around them seemed to pulse in response to their efforts. In that moment, they knew they were on the precipice of something monumental, an opportunity to rewrite the tragic narrative of the zoo and finally grant the spirits the release they so desperately sought. With each word spoken and each gesture made, the bond between the living and the dead grew stronger, intertwining their fates as they prepared for the ultimate reckoning. The zoo would not be merely a haunted relic of the past. It would become a place of healing, a sanctuary where the stories of the lost could finally be told, and the spirits could find their way home. The air in the chamber thickened, charged with the weight of the spirits' presence as Daniel and Maya began the ritual of reconciliation. The flickering light cast eerie shadows across the walls, dancing with an energy that felt both ancient and alive. The artifacts they had gathered lay before them, each item a conduit connecting the living to the dead, the known to the unknown. With every word spoken, they felt the veil between their worlds thin, the past and present colliding in a kaleidoscope of memories and emotions. As they proceeded with the ritual, Daniel's heart raced with a mix of excitement and dread. He was acutely aware of the history that enveloped them, the tragedies, the lost hopes, and the lingering sorrow that had ensnared the zoo for decades. The spirits swirled around them, their whispers growing louder, forming a chorus of unresolved grief that echoed in the chamber. Daniel realized that this moment was not merely about reconciliation. It was a chance to confront the darkness that had led to the zoo's downfall. Maya, standing steadfast beside him, could feel the energy intensifying. "Do you think they're trying to show us something?" she asked, her eyes scanning the flickering shadows. Daniel nodded, his intuition guiding him to believe that the spirits were indeed attempting to communicate their truth. "We need to listen closely," he replied, focusing on the rhythmic cadence of their voices. "They're telling us more than just their sorrow. They want us to understand the circumstances that bound them to this place." With renewed determination, they chanted louder, invoking the names of the lost animals and zookeepers, calling forth their stories. As they did, visions began to materialize around them, fleeting glimpses of the zoo's vibrant past, interwoven with the tragedies that had unfolded. Daniel saw a zookeeper, her face etched with concern, trying to calm a restless elephant that had sensed the shifting energy of the spirits. He could feel the fear radiating from her, a palpable tension that filled the air. Maya, too, witnessed the visions unfold. She saw a group of children laughing as they fed the giraffes, their joy palpable, only to be interrupted by the sudden chaos that ensued when a storm rolled in. The joy of that day was overshadowed by a harrowing accident, an event that seemed to ripple through time and cement the zoo's misfortune. "It's as if these moments have been trapped in time," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "They're replaying their sorrow, trying to make us understand what happened." Suddenly, a jarring vision overtook them, plunging them into darkness. Daniel found himself standing in the center of the zoo, but it was not the dilapidated remains he had known. Instead, it was alive with color and sound, a vibrant celebration of life. People milled about, and the air was filled with laughter and excitement. But as he looked closer, he noticed the shadows lurking at the edges, figures whispering among themselves, their faces twisted in anger and resentment. "Maya, look!" he shouted, pointing to the shadows. "There's something sinister lurking just beneath the surface." As they focused on the shadows, the air shifted, revealing glimpses of rituals and ceremonies performed by the zookeepers, intended to connect with the spirits of the animals. Yet, there was a sense of desperation in their actions, as if they were grasping at something they did not fully comprehend. The atmosphere thickened with unease, the spirits around them growing restless. In that moment, Daniel understood. The zookeepers had not merely sought to commune with the spirits. They had inadvertently disturbed a delicate balance. The rituals, born from good intentions, had unleashed a force they could not control. The guardians of the zoo had become enraged, their anger a reflection of the pain and fear that had been neglected for so long. "We need to find a way to restore that balance," Daniel said, his voice rising above the tumult of the spirits. "We must understand their pain to heal it." Maya, sensing the urgency in his words, dug deeper into the artifacts surrounding them. She stumbled upon a journal that had been overlooked, its pages yellowed with age. Flipping it open, she found detailed accounts of the rituals, along with sketches of the zoo's animals. But what caught her attention were the annotations, written in frantic handwriting. "They feared the spirits," she read aloud. "They believed they were cursed for their attempts to harness the power of the zoo." The implications hit Daniel like a bolt of lightning. The fear that had gripped the zookeepers had manifested in the anger of the spirits, creating a cycle of pain that had lasted decades. They were trapped in a loop of misunderstanding, unable to move forward. "If we can show them that we acknowledge their pain, perhaps we can break the cycle," he proposed, his resolve solidifying. With the newfound knowledge coursing through them, Daniel and Maya adjusted their chant, weaving in the acknowledgement of the spirit's suffering. "We see you," Daniel called out, his voice ringing clear in the chamber. "We honor your pain and the lives lost within these walls." The air shimmered, and for a moment, the shadows hesitated, their whispers turning from anger to a quiet acknowledgement of their recognition. As they continued, the atmosphere shifted again, a palpable change rippling through the chamber. The spirits began to coalesce, forming a circle around Daniel and Maya. The whispers transformed into a harmonious melody, echoing the hopes of those who had once walked these grounds. "We are here to mend what was broken," Maya added, her heart racing with hope. "Together, we will find peace." In that instant, the darkness that had loomed over the zoo began to dissipate. The shadows, once so menacing, transformed into gentle lights that swirled around the room, illuminating the path forward. Daniel and Maya felt the weight of the spirit's gratitude, an overwhelming sensation that surged through them like a tidal wave. They were no longer mere witnesses to the zoo's sorrow. They were active participants in the healing process, restoring hope to the forgotten souls that had wandered in anguish for too long. As the ritual reached its crescendo, the boundaries of the past began to blur. They could sense the shift in the air, the once anguished spirits releasing their pain and embracing the possibility of reconciliation. The zoo, once a graveyard of memories, was on the brink of transformation, poised to become a sanctuary where the stories of the lost could finally be told. In that moment, Daniel and Maya understood that they were the bridge between the past and the future, entrusted with the legacy of the zoo and the spirits that inhabited it. With the energy around them pulsating with life, Daniel and Maya prepared for the final invocation of the ritual, ready to usher in a new dawn for the zoo, one filled with healing, understanding, and renewed hope. The shadows that had haunted this place were slowly fading, making way for a brighter narrative, one where the past could finally find peace and the spirits could soar free, leaving behind the chains of sorrow that had held them captive for far too long. The air shimmered with a newfound energy as the ritual concluded, leaving Daniel and Maya enveloped in a cocoon of warmth and light. The shadows that had once lurked menacingly in the corners of the zoo seemed to dissipate, transforming into gentle beams of luminescence. As they caught their breath, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment and relief. The spirits, once tormented by their tragic past, were finally finding solace, but there was still one more chapter to unfold in this haunting narrative. While the zoo began to shift around them, the structures morphing into their former glory, a sense of urgency remained. Though they had brought peace to many spirits, Daniel sensed an unresolved presence still lingering, a final spirit whose anguish was intertwined with the very essence of the zoo. He shared this feeling with Maya, and her eyes widened with understanding. "There's one more," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. "We must find them." Determined, they began to explore the revived zoo, which was slowly regaining its vibrancy. The once overgrown pathways now revealed blooming flowers and lush greenery, each step resonating with life and renewal. They moved cautiously, aware that although the air felt lighter, shadows still flickered at the edges of their vision. The spirits that had once haunted this place were merging with the natural world, but one particular presence seemed resistant to this transformation. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the zoo, they stumbled upon the old lion enclosure. The heavy metal bars that had confined the regal animals had rusted and crumbled, leaving a ghostly silhouette of its former self. Here, Daniel felt a surge of energy, a connection that pulled him closer. "This is where the heart of the sorrow lies," he murmured, kneeling beside the remnants of the enclosure. "The lion, it must be the spirit we need to find." Maya knelt beside him, placing her hand on the ground. "I can feel it too," she confirmed. This lion was more than just a captive. It was a symbol of strength and power. Its spirit is tied to the fate of the zoo. As they sat in contemplation, the wind began to stir, a soft whisper weaving through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of the lion's roar, a sound that spoke of untamed wilderness and a longing for freedom. Determined to reach the lion's spirit, Daniel and Maya decided to conduct one final invocation, this time focusing on the essence of the lion, a creature that had once roamed majestically through the vast savanna. They gathered remnants of the past, a broken collar from the enclosure, a dried tuft of fur, and an old photograph of the lion taken by a zookeeper during its time of glory. With these artifacts, they hoped to bridge the gap between the realms once more. As they initiated the invocation, they channeled their energy towards the lion's spirit, calling it forth with respect and reverence. "We honor you, great guardian of this zoo," Daniel intoned, his voice steady. "We seek your presence, your story, and your truth." As he spoke, the air thickened with anticipation, and for a fleeting moment, the world around them faded. The sounds of the living zoo quieted, and in that silence, they could hear the heartbeat of the past echoing through the ground beneath them. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind swept through the area, swirling around them like a tempest. The remnants of the lion's enclosure vibrated with energy, and before their eyes, the spirit of the lion materialized, a magnificent creature with golden fur and piercing eyes that held centuries of wisdom and strength. It stood regal and proud, yet there was a deep sadness in its gaze, as if it carried the weight of countless memories and burdens. "Why do you disturb my rest?" The lion's voice rumbled, resonating in their minds rather than in the physical space around them. Daniel's heart raced as he met the lion's gaze, feeling the intensity of its sorrow. "We seek to understand your pain," he replied earnestly. "Your story is entwined with the fate of this zoo, and we wish to help you find peace." The lion's expression softened, its golden mane shimmering in the ethereal light. "I was a guardian here, the spirit of strength and pride. But my life ended in despair. I sensed the fear in my keepers, their attempts to control me, to bend me to their will. My spirit remains bound to this place because I could not protect those who relied on me." The weight of its words hung in the air, a palpable reminder of the tragic events that had transpired. Maya stepped forward, her voice trembling with compassion. "We understand that you were a protector. The fear that consumed your keepers also ensnared you. But we are here now to honor your legacy, to set you free." The lion's gaze flickered with a glimmer of hope, and Daniel felt a surge of energy pass between them. They had tapped into the essence of the lion's spirit, a powerful force that could break the chains binding it to the past. With renewed determination, Daniel and Maya initiated the final phase of the invocation, channeling their energy towards the lion. They spoke words of release and gratitude, acknowledging the lion's role as both a guardian and a symbol of the zoo's spirit. "You are free to roam, to return to the wild," Daniel urged, his voice echoing through the remnants of the enclosure. "Your spirit deserves to soar." As they completed the invocation, a radiant light enveloped the lion, illuminating the space with an ethereal glow. The shadows that had once clung to the corners of the zoo began to recede, replaced by the warmth of liberation. The lion's spirit roared, a triumphant sound that reverberated through the air, shaking the very foundation of the zoo. The echo of its power resonated with the hearts of the living, binding Daniel and Maya to the spirit of the lion forever. In that moment, they knew they had not only freed the lion, but had also transformed the essence of the zoo itself. The stories of all the animals and their keepers could finally be told. No longer a tale of sorrow, but one of hope, healing, and redemption. As the spirit of the lion faded into the light, Daniel and Maya stood together, their hearts swelling with a sense of fulfillment. They had become the bearers of a new narrative, one that would ensure the legacy of the zoo was honored and remembered. With the zoo now a sanctuary of healing and understanding, Daniel and Maya prepared to leave, knowing they had fulfilled their purpose. The shadows that once haunted this place had been transformed into memories, their power harnessed to create a vibrant tapestry of life. Together, they stepped forward into the light, ready to embrace the dawn of a new era, an era where the zoo would thrive once more, filled with the echoes of redemption and the promise of freedom. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the thick canopy of trees, Daniel and Maya stood at the entrance of the revived zoo, their hearts brimming with hope and anticipation. The shadows of the past had faded, replaced by the vibrant hues of life that now pulsed through the air. The once closed gates now stood open, inviting all who dared to enter a place of wonder, healing, and redemption. The journey they had embarked on was not just about the spirits they had freed, but also about the living legacy they were about to create together. In the weeks following the ritual, the zoo had undergone a remarkable transformation. Community members, inspired by the stories of the spirits they had once feared, rallied together to restore the zoo to its former glory. Volunteers poured in, cleaning the enclosures, planting gardens, and crafting educational exhibits that told the tales of the animals that had once called this place home. Daniel and Maya found themselves at the forefront of this movement, leading workshops and sharing the stories of the spirits, ensuring that the past would be honored as the foundation of their future. As they worked side by side, their bond deepened. Daniel admired Maya's unwavering passion for animals and nature, while Maya was inspired by Daniel's strength and compassion. Together, they envisioned a zoo that would not only provide a home for animals, but also serve as a sanctuary for healing and education. They dreamed of creating programs that would connect visitors with the animals, fostering empathy and understanding, ensuring that no one would forget the sacrifices made by the spirits of the past. One sunny afternoon, as they walked through the zoo's revitalized grounds, Maya stopped to admire a new exhibit that had been designed to educate visitors about the importance of conservation. "This is what it's all about, Daniel," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We're creating a space where people can learn and connect with the natural world, breaking down the barriers that once kept us apart." Daniel nodded, feeling a swell of pride at how far they had come. They had not only transformed the zoo, but also redefined its purpose. As the opening day approached, the excitement in the community reached a fever pitch. News of the zoo's rebirth spread like wildfire, attracting attention from local media and animal lovers alike. On the day of the grand reopening, families gathered at the gates, eagerly awaiting the moment they could step into a world that had been reborn. Daniel and Maya stood at the entrance, watching as the crowd swelled, their hearts racing with anticipation. When the gates finally swung open, a cheer erupted from the crowd, echoing through the revitalized zoo. Children dashed forward, eyes wide with wonder, while adults exchanged stories of the zoo's haunted past and its hopeful future. As they made their way through the exhibits, Daniel and Maya moved among the guests, sharing the tales of the spirits they had freed. Each story served as a reminder of the sacrifices made for the greater good, inspiring a sense of connection and responsibility. As they reached the lion enclosure, the heart of the zoo, Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "This is where it all began," he said softly to Maya. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the empty space where the lion once roamed. "It's a reminder that strength comes from understanding and compassion," she replied, her voice filled with conviction. Together, they placed a small plaque at the entrance of the enclosure, inscribed with the words, "In memory of those who have come before us. May their stories inspire our journey." As the day wore on, Daniel and Maya found themselves surrounded by laughter and joy, a stark contrast to the darkness that had once consumed this place. They watched as families interacted with the animals, children laughing as they fed the goats and marveled at the beauty of the exotic birds. The atmosphere was alive with energy, a testament to the healing that had taken place. It was as if the spirits of the zoo had awakened, celebrating the new life that had blossomed from their sacrifices. Yet, amidst the joy, Daniel felt a whisper in the wind, a gentle reminder of the work that lay ahead. "We must continue to honor their stories," he said to Maya, the determination in his voice evident. "This is just the beginning." Maya smiled, her eyes reflecting the commitment they both shared. "We'll create programs that educate visitors about wildlife conservation and how we can protect these creatures in the wild. We can't let their legacy fade." Together, they brainstormed ideas for workshops, community events, and partnerships with local schools, each initiative designed to foster a sense of stewardship for the natural world. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the zoo, Daniel and Maya took a moment to reflect on their journey. They had not only revived a forgotten place, but had also woven together the threads of past and present, creating a tapestry of stories that would guide their future. The echoes of the spirits resonated in their hearts, a constant reminder of the importance of compassion, understanding, and connection. With the zoo thriving and the community united, Daniel and Maya stood hand in hand, ready to embrace the future. The ghosts of the past had transformed into guardians of hope, watching over the zoo as it became a sanctuary of education and healing. The journey they had embarked on had not only changed their lives, but had also sparked a movement that would ripple through generations. Together, they had created a legacy that would ensure the stories of the spirits would never be forgotten, and that the zoo would forever be a place of wonder, connection, and redemption. In the years to come, as the zoo continued to flourish, Daniel and Maya often found themselves wandering through its grounds, sharing stories with visitors and reflecting on their own journey. They knew that the spirits they had once feared were now part of the very fabric of the zoo, guiding its mission to educate and inspire. As they looked towards the horizon, they understood that every ending was merely a new beginning, and the journey of redemption and hope would continue to unfold, one story at a time.